If you started Fortune Mill thinking it was just another relaxing incremental game, I have news for you. There is a lot more going on behind this factory than it seems. This is the type of game that rewards those who understand the details and punishes those who play on autopilot. So today, I am going to show you 10 advanced tips that completely accelerated my progress, optimized my production, and most importantly, saved me from those mistakes that only appear after hours of gameplay. If you want to move past the basics and truly master the game, stick with me because this video might change the way you play Fortune Mill. I'm Matthew, and the video is about to start. If there is one thing Fortune Mill does very well, it is misleading first-time players. In the beginning, it seems like the obvious path is to invest heavily in a single room, maximize it, and move on. However, the more you play, the clearer it becomes that this is not the heart of the game. The real leap in progress happens when you begin to understand the weight of synergy upgrades. These improvements are basically the point where the game stops growing linearly and truly starts to explode. Instead of just upgrading the production of an isolated room, you start using coins from previous rooms to multiply the gains of others. And that is where the magic happens, because these multipliers are not subtle. They are absurdly stronger than basic upgrades. The most interesting part is that this is not a shortcut or an alternative strategy. The game was clearly designed around this. If you ignore synergy, you feel like you are always a step behind, as if progress is stuck. But the moment you start prioritizing these upgrades, the rhythm changes completely, and that heavy grind turns into an almost addictive, accelerated growth. So in practice, think of it this way. Every time you unlock a new room, do not abandon the old ones. Use them as fuel. Synergies transform old progress into new power. It is exactly this chain effect that causes the scaling to get out of hand and makes Fortune Mill so satisfying in the mid and late game. The game makes you comfortable with a more manual approach at the start, but that is merely a transition phase. True progress begins when you stop relying so much on your direct actions. When the darts in room 1 and the scratch cards in room 2 become automated, the entire pace changes. It is not just a quality of life improvement, it is practically a leap in efficiency. Suddenly, the game keeps producing resources on its own, and you begin to notice that time starts working for you, not against you. I like to view this moment as a shift in mindset. Before, you play reactively, trying to squeeze the most out of every click. Afterward, you transition to building a system that grows on its own. And the more you invest in these automations, the more the game rewards you with consistent progression, even when you are not as active. So my tip is simple. Prioritize this without second guessing. As soon as it unlocks, direct your upgrades toward strengthening these automations, because from that point on, Fortune Mill stops being a game of constant effort and becomes a game of smart scaling. And that is exactly where it begins to truly shine. One of the things that caught me off guard was realizing that Room 2 is not just a continuation, it completely changes the rhythm of the game once you unlock the jackpot. Initially, I ignored the Giga Frog a bit, assuming it was just another secondary system, but once you understand its impact, it becomes difficult to play without prioritizing it. The Giga Frog hides jackpots that go far beyond Room 2 itself. They deliver permanent bonuses that remain active even when you return to previous areas, which is massive in an incremental game. It is not just a temporary boost, it is real cumulative progress that redefines how many resources you can generate. And the most interesting detail is how this feeds back into Room 1. Items like golden weapons completely alter the efficiency of your early game, making the part that would normally be slower become virtually automatic. It is the kind of upgrade you feel immediately because everything starts moving faster without effort. So if you want to truly accelerate, the focus is simple. Get to the Room 2 jackpot as soon as possible. Do not treat this as optional content. These permanent bonuses are the kind of advantage that cuts down hours of grind, and when you get the first one, it becomes very clear that the game expects you to use this to your advantage. Something I used to do in the beginning was treating rooms as disposable stages. Like, I've already passed this part, I don't need to look at it anymore. Except the game does not work that way. In practice, abandoning old rooms is basically slowing down your own progress without realizing it. The cross-income system is what sustains everything behind the scenes. Even the very first rooms continue to generate value that directly impacts your ability to buy more expensive upgrades later on. And when you ignore this, you start to feel like the game is slowed down, when in reality, it was your own choice that choked the flow. I started evolving much faster when I stopped focusing solely on the current room and began viewing the game as an ecosystem. Keeping all rooms active, all contributing at the same time, creates a solid foundation of passive income. This makes progress much more stable and less dependent on sudden spikes in earnings. So the ideal mindset here is no room gets left behind. Keep everything running, even if it seems like a small amount at first. Because in Fortune Mill, this accumulated global production is what actually allows you to reach the heavier upgrades without struggling. And that is what separates stagnant progress from a smooth flow. Helpers might seem like a purely visual, almost cosmetic detail, but that misconception falls apart quickly once you start testing them properly. Choosing the right helper completely changes the pace of your farm, and ignoring this means leaving power on the table. The machine gunner mouse, for instance, is the kind of choice that accelerates everything tied to dart damage. If your strategy revolves around clearing quickly and generating resources efficiently, he becomes practically mandatory. You feel the difference instantly, especially when you start scaling and realize you are advancing faster than before with the exact same setup. On the other hand, the Toad Accountant offers a different, more strategic advantage. The concept of tax evasion might sound simple, but in the context of the game, it means retaining more resources and optimizing each earning cycle. Over long runs, this translates into a massive impact because you are constantly accumulating more than you normally should. The point here is clear. These helpers are not decorations. They are an essential part of your build. The game itself makes this evident. They are even mentioned on the official Steam page. So instead of choosing based on aesthetics, think about what you want to optimize at that moment. Aligning the right helper with your farming priority is the kind of decision that separates slow progress from truly efficient growth. At first glance, pets seem like just a secondary, almost cosmetic bonus. However, as you advance, it becomes clear that they are one of the strongest tools for accelerating the game without direct effort. The secret is understanding that pets are not just little helps, they are silent multipliers. They step into the most repetitive and slow parts of the game and turn them into something much more efficient. That feeling of a heavy grind simply diminishes when you have well-evolved pets working alongside you. A common mistake is leaving pets aside while focusing solely on the rooms, but the ideal approach is the exact opposite. Keep everything synchronized. If your rooms are advancing and your pets fall behind, you lose a massive amount of passive earning potential. When both grow together, progress becomes much more consistent and fast. I began to feel the real impact when I started treating pets as a strategic priority rather than an extra. Keeping them evolving constantly and aligned with your strongest rooms creates a snowball effect that accelerates everything. Ultimately, they do not just help, they are an essential part of your advancement. There comes a moment when you realize it is not just about earning money. You have to know when to earn it. The $1 million limit in each room seems like just a milestone, but in practice, it becomes a strategic turning point. If you keep spending resources prematurely, you end up delaying a push that could be much more efficient. The secret here is to hold back the urgency a bit and prepare the ground. Instead of buying a basic upgrade every time you gather cash, the ideal approach is to build a multiplier foundation strong enough to burst through that value all at once. When you do this, the difference in progression speed is massive. This connects directly with the gold bonuses. If you activate or reach these boosts at the right moment, the gain is not just incremental, it becomes a giant leap. It is that feeling of moving from slow growth to a sudden spike, where you break through the 1 million mark almost without noticing. Therefore, the mindset shifts completely. It is not about spending constantly, it is about spending at the right time. Preparing this final push makes each room much faster to complete, and once you get the timing down, the game starts to flow in a much more satisfying way. One of the major turning points for me was understanding that the game does not want you to stay stationary in a single room. It practically pushes you into this constant cycle between rooms, and when you try to ignore it, progress begins to feel strange and somewhat stuck. It was only when I started respecting this room cycle that everything began to click. The logic is quite clear. You advance in a room until you unlock truly strong automations, the ones that allow it to run by itself, and then you return to strengthen the previous ones. This creates a flow where no part of the game is left behind, and all of them continue to contribute to your overall growth. The problem with leaving a room dead is that you cut off a piece of your own production. Since the game works with this interconnected system, each active room helps feed the whole. When one stops producing, you feel the impact on global earnings, even if you do not immediately realize where the loss is coming from. So the ideal approach is always to think of progress as a cycle, not a straight line. Advance, unlock, return, strengthen, and repeat. Once you find this rhythm, Fortune Mill stops feeling like a fragmented grind and becomes a well-knit system where everything works together to accelerate your scaling. When you reach room 4 and unlock sushi cooking, it looks like just another different mechanic, but in practice, it functions almost like a soft prestige. It is not permanent, but the impact it has on your progress is large enough to completely change how you approach the hardest moments of the game. The key point here is not to use sushi carelessly. Many people activate it as soon as they can, but advanced players do the opposite. They hold on to resources, wait for the right moment, and use high-tier sushi exactly before making a heavy push in a difficult room. That is where the system truly shines. When used correctly, the effect is practically an explosive mode. You activate the buffs, and suddenly that stuck progress starts moving rapidly, expensive upgrades become accessible, and you break through barriers that would normally take much more time. It is an efficiency spike that completely redefines the pace. I started taking much more advantage of this mechanic when I stopped viewing sushi as a random bonus and began treating it as a strategic tool. Storing, preparing, and using it at the right moment makes all the difference. In the end, that is what makes sushi cooking one of the strongest mechanics in the game, not because of constant use, but because of perfect timing. A very classic trap I fell into is that urge to buy everything as soon as it shows up. The game throws expensive upgrades in your face all the time, and the sensation is that you need to grab them immediately. However, in practice, doing this almost always delays your progress. This happens because many of these upgrades scale with the total money you have already earned. In other words, the cost seems fixed at that moment, but in relative terms, it becomes much cheaper if you simply let the game run a little longer. Passively farming before buying completely alters the weight of that investment. When you wait, you not only pay less for the upgrade, but you also reach it with a stronger foundation. This means its impact is more efficient because it enters a system that is already generating significantly more resources. It is the kind of detail that seems small, but over time saves a lot of effort. Ultimately, this is pure, well-crafted, incremental design. The game rewards patience and timing. Instead of buying everything on impulse, it is much more worthwhile to observe the rhythm of your economy and choose the right moment. When you start playing this way, everything becomes smoother and progress flows much better.